So new this morning, the Biden campaign enlisting movie star and known Trump critic Robert De Niro for an ad targeting what they see as the dangers of a second Trump presidency.
We knew Trump was out of control when he was president. Then he lost the 2020 election and snapped, desperately trying to hold on to power. Now he's running again, this time threatening to be a dictator, to terminate the Constitution.
Right, with us now, Democratic strategist Matt Bennett and CNN senior political commentator Scott Jennings. Matt, what do you think about this? Look, I know it's not the only messaging that the Biden campaign is doing, but how much do you focus on the issue, that the dictator, in quotation marks, issue, as opposed to other things?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence that Americans are really worried about a return to power of a guy who is as unstable and chaotic as Trump. And it is just undeniably true that he has been saying things every single day that are incredibly alarming to people who believe in the American system of government. So this has been the theme that Joe Biden has been running on since the day he announced his run for president in 2020. He has never really changed. His opponent obviously is going to be the same this time. So I think it's a consistent theme that has worked before. And I think it goes to the heart of the thing that Americans are most worried about when it comes to Trump. They may be looking back at his economy through rose-colored glasses, but they know that he is an agent of chaos and is very dangerous.
Scott, what happens when Americans are reminded of these things?
Well, you can just ask the pollsters. As Americans reflect on Trump and Biden and their respective presidencies, overwhelmingly, Donald Trump is getting the nod from the American people. They remember his presidency far better than what Matt just described. I mean, these videos, it's really what Joe Biden has. It's fear and dishonesty. I mean, terminate the Constitution. That is a fear tactic. No one's running on terminating the United States Constitution. But I think Biden is getting increasingly panicky and increasingly dishonest. And I think you're going to see more of that. They think their base is more motivated by this kind of panicky fear mongering than they are by Joe Biden's policy, which, maybe that's true, because if you look at the polls, even Democrats aren't so hot to trot on what Biden's accomplished in office.
Look, I will say, and we ran the video yesterday, we don't have it right now, but Steve Bannon, big Trump supporter, is out there saying, we want your fear. We welcome your fear. This is what you're going to see when Trump is elected, authority, Matt. So is there a double-edged sword here? And Matt, if Americans did care as much about this, I'm not going to speculate about whether they should or not, but if they did, wouldn't you see more evidence of it in the polls?
I don't think yet. I think at the moment people are still responding, pollsters, with the real focus on the things that they're kind of seeing in their lives. And there's no question that people are worried about inflation. That is probably the thing that is driving the polls at the moment. But Scott can try to wish this away all he wants. Donald Trump said that he would terminate parts of the Constitution. It came right out of his mouth. And there's a whole bunch of things that you are going to see in Biden campaign ads over the course of the next 5 months that make it clear to people that he cannot be entrusted with power. That is the most fundamental question. Will he keep us safe? That is the first question people ask when they pick a president. And Trump cannot be trusted to keep us safe. He is too chaotic, he is too authoritarian-minded, and he is too narcissistic to be the president of the United States.
Scott, I want to shift gears, if I can, to the messaging we heard from Donald Trump in the Bronx overnight, reaching out overtly to minority voters. Listen.
African Americans are getting slaughtered. Hispanic Americans are getting slaughtered. And these millions and millions of people that are coming into our country, the biggest impact and the biggest negative impact is against our black population and our Hispanic population, who are losing their jobs, losing their housing, losing everything they can lose.
The right message, Scott?
Well, that whole rally, the crowd, the message, it is reflective of the new Republican Party that Trump is remaking. More working class, multiracial, more populist. This is a message that is, I think, working with different populations, and he singled them right out. Hispanics and African Americans, particularly working class portions of those two groups, I think you're going to continue to hear it. And this is going to the core of who we have always thought, Democrats have branded themselves as the party of the working class. Well, Trump's going right after it, and he's agnostic about race. He's going right after it. And no matter what kind of a working class American you are, he wants you.
Matt, and you've worked on the idea of political realignment, for years. Do you see a political realignment underway?
There's no question that there is somewhat of a realignment around educational attainment. The Democrats are attracting a lot more college-educated voters than we did before. And Scott is right. There has been an erosion of Democratic support among non-college voters of all races, and that is very worrying. I mean, Biden's going to win black voters by overwhelming margins, but not by the same margins probably that he did last time. And that means we have real work to do to communicate to the people of all races about what a next Biden administration would look like, and if they entrust the government to Trump, what that would mean for them and how dangerous that would be.
Matt Bennett, Scott Jennings, both of you have a wonderful holiday weekend. Stay safe. Thank you.